Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast, where we're shining a light on the painful, taboo, and necessary topics we need to address and consider in our individual and collective journey to shame resilience. I am beyond excited for you all to meet my guest today, a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Laura Minero. Dr. Minero earned her PhD in counseling psychology and has dedicated her life-affirming work to revolutionizing systems that adversely impact undocumented, queer, trans, and communities of colors. Her efforts are expansive, from consulting to keynote speaking at national and international events, and her contributions to scientific studies used to inform national policy as a science policy and technology fellow with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. In addition, she went on to become a licensed psychologist specializing in working with BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and immigrant communities at her independent practice, Yolot Libre Therapy, Training, and Consulting based in California. Laura and I met during our training program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and it's been an incredible experience to watch her find her voice and channel it through a lens of humility and tenacity to fight for, support, and empower people affected by oppressive systems. Laura was also one of the featured stories in my documentary, Reclaim Beauty, where we brought together a diverse group of people to talk about standards of beauty, self-love, and acceptance. And to say I'll cherish those moments forever doesn't even do them justice. Laura has a way to put hard truths out into the world without apologies or passiveness, while also helping you hold them and consider just what is your right and responsibility to be a part of changing the story. Today, we get to take this to an even deeper level as we focus on the topic of heterocissexism, what it means, how it shows up in our world, the impact it has, and what true liberation and expansiveness looks like for the people and communities oppressed by these systems. We were chatting offline. I'm so excited. I am hot. I'm like sweaty and cold at the same time. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I thank you for your words. I have to start off and just say that. Like, I have tears in my eyes. This is what happens every time Kira and I speak. Kira is just such an intentional, magical person and really sees you. So and it's been like years that we haven't like fully talked.
Yes.
So it's just so magical to see the energy force like immediately come together between us. And thank you for reflecting all of that back to me. It means a lot to me. So what a way to start. Woo.
I know. I thought about it, and you're getting an idea to maybe the answer to my question, but what I do love to start every episode with is a one-word check-in. So I'm sure this feels like a Dr. Laura thing back in grad school. It's like something she would do. I haven't even called her out yet for it, but I'll have to let her know. But just what is one word that you would use to describe how you're feeling right now, either about this episode, about us, just life, one word to give us where you're at?
Electric.
Ooh, electric. I love that. I've never used that word like that before, but that is totally what it is. I learned recently that I feel my like rushes, my like dopamine hits, they feel like pop rocks in the front of my brain. And as I was saying the part about where we met and just thinking, I instantly went back to the recording for the documentary. And actually before we even recorded, but when we were chatting outside at that dance studio, and I got the Pop Rocks feel because of just, there's this thing that you do when we started our program. We were both in very different journeys and experiences within it and kind of at different points in our lives. And one of the things that I really appreciated was I always felt like you were a person that wanted to create space for everybody to hold their own and to pull each other into hard topics to grow. And so you would do that for me. You would call me out in a way that you would push me to think differently, and you wanted me to do that for you. And it's just this, like, I'm getting it again right now as I'm talking. And I think that is sort of the magic that I appreciate about you. And so even thinking about this conversation today, there's a lot of places I'm aware that I'm going to have privilege and bias that I'm not aware of. And so as we think about talking, you know, we break it down: hetero, cis, sexism. And as I don't really want to say I am in a heterosexual relationship, but I think having explored what that means, I think most people, it's somewhere between the 0 and the 100. It's in that 1 to 99. And so sort of recognizing that scale of experience, but being in a heterosexual relationship, being a cisgender human, this is something that is hard, and I want it to be pushed. And so the tingle feeling, I think, is getting to do that with you. And so tell me where you want to start with this. When you think about you getting to this place where this is what you do, how you show up, the impact you're making in the world personally and professionally, how did you get here?
Oh my goodness. And again, I think we're going to keep doing this throughout this podcast, because this is who we are. We just like go back and forth and thank each other, like,
yeah,
mindfulness. I feel like this is going to be our podcast the whole time. So like, thank you for kind of locating yourself and our, you know, the dynamics between us, and just that acknowledgement, I think, is really important. I always like to start by locating myself. And kind of sharing my positionality, which is really integral to just how I show up in the world everywhere. I feel like if we all did that more, we would have more grace. We would have more compassion. We would just connect. We would have that electrifying feeling, those chills when you just connect as you listen to someone. Right? Like I feel like if we did that more often, then we just would give ourselves the capacity to see, to feel, to hear, to understand at this deeper level. And that's part of why I do that all the time. So just so people understand why I do that, I always like to start by acknowledging my mom and dad, Silvia and Carlos Minero, who see, as soon as I bring them into the space and any space, it's like this rush of emotions, because they have done anything and everything for me, including leaving their home country, their parents, their siblings behind, so that I could have an opportunity, and not just any opportunities that wouldn't have been available to me if we had stayed in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, which is beautiful, stunning place. But the opportunities simply were not there because we were poor, and we lived in one household with my other two single mother aunts. So there was 3 families living under one home, and we were all just trying to make it, right? So I came at the age of 5 and grew up in California. I'm very grateful for that. Feel very privileged to have grown up in California. But I witnessed my parents, despite even, you know, I think these conversations are important. My parents are my adoptive parents, and they have much lighter skin than I do. And I don't even think I realized that, like, truly until the last few years, because it's just like, this is my family, right? But even with them being light skin, lighter eyes than me, I saw them experience significant racism and discrimination and exclusion, because the language wasn't accessible to them, right? They primarily spoke Spanish, and they didn't have access to a driver's license. They didn't have access to a social security number, which automatically excluded them from so many things. So those were my experiences. And simultaneously, I was witnessing this and also having my own experiences, exploring myself, my own identities, my gender, my sexual orientation. So I was growing up witnessing this, but also feeling like I couldn't fully and openly be myself, because growing up in my home and the culture and what had been passed down to them, all they've ever known, all they've ever had access to was that everyone needs to and has to be heterosexual, and everyone has to be cisgender, and you don't do anything else, right? So I learned about intersectionality without having words for it very early on in my life, and also what it meant to be borderlands, right? Like, I'm not American because I don't have a social, but I'm not Mexican because I'm far away from my country, right? Like, there was just so many experiences that I was neither fully here or fully there. I was always kind of like in the middle, in between, and had to figure myself out at a really, really young age. And I feel like that also pushed me to learn to deeply love myself, because I felt like I couldn't turn to the external world to get that, because oftentimes it was what was reflected back to me was that I was not normal, that I was not lovable, that I would not be accepted if I was fooling myself, and so that shaped a lot of my experiences. But there was something within me that always said, and I had always asked myself, like, what was that? Like, there was something in me that always said I wasn't going to give up my own freedom and my own life to please somebody else or be complacent. And that was so complex with my parents. It was the most complex, I think, for many of us, right? We want to please, we want to be good with them. So that I'm locating myself in that, and just like the complexities of really, really learning myself and learning to show up fully. Was like this onion. I felt like this onion of like constantly unpeeling layers, and not challenging my own self to not fit in, because that would somehow give me love or approval.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think about even, so you're considering the intergenerational transmission of stories and systems of, again, we're talking about rigid boxes. There's only heterosexual, there's only male or female. These have to be the things that you do. And then you're existing here where you're seeing your parents combat, you're, taking in your own experiences of racism, of othering based on this one part of yourself. And so now there's not only what they were taught, but my guess is a protectiveness of like, we've already got a check against us. We've already got something that's going to make life harder. I don't want life to be harder for you. I mean, I think about this now, even with a 3-year-old. I want to say that regardless of how she identifies and what she chooses to do in this world, that I'm going to show up fully. And I believe on a level that I will. And I think there are times I'm going to get it wrong, because that defensiveness is so automatic. And so there's this piece of that for you where you're seeing, because a lot of times we talk about systems and isms of oppression, we think about the sort of outward aggression, or like the ways that somebody's like, well, you can't use this bathroom because you're Black. Like, that is not the ways that someone's sense of self gets eroded. It's all the subtleties of how it shows up. It's the idea that it's embedded in that sense of protection. It's embedded in that sense of performance. It's embedded in all these things. And so you're taking all of this in, holding it, while you're becoming aware of yourself. And something, like you said, I wish I knew what it was too, but there's this piece of you. I mean, it's you. That's really what it is. It's just the authentic part of you that couldn't be touched by those systems. That was too loud in a good way to say, and that there's a bad way to be loud, but it was so loud. It was like, look, you can scream at me, but I'm going to scream loud too. And both of these things exist. And that, I think, sums up my experience of you through grad school. It's like witnessing those moments, witnessing those points of, I want to hear you and see you, and I want to be wrong sometimes, but I'm not going to lose my voice in the process of doing that. And I'm not going to not show up. And so I can't imagine that for you And you're acknowledging a certain sense of yourself that allows you to get there, a certain degree of resilience, maybe innately in you that you conditioned and you had. And now you're trying to do this work and have these conversations and show up for a lot of people that don't have that are existing in these systems, that have been affected by these systems directly, indirectly, all across, are perpetuating the systems, regardless of where they identify within and around them. That feels heavy. That feels intense. Is that, how does it sit with you? Just as we're talking about this and you're sort of pulling all those senses of self together to think about who you are now and all this work that you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting that you say heavy, because how it sits with me now, I think going back, it was heavy. Like, back then it wasn't easy. Like,
right.
And I love how you brought in your own kind of experience and identity as a mother. And it's interesting how that's what you pulled out from what I said. It was like, almost like, I'm sure your parents probably wanted to protect you, knowing what was against them and you already. And that, like, honestly, I could see that for my mom, it was fear. For my dad, it was a lot more like conditioning, like, my religion says this. So, like, it was more like that. And for my mom, it was like this deep fear that I wasn't going to have a normal and a good life. And she had this deep fear that I was going to be alone a lot of my life. And like, there really is brutality against Two-Spirit, queer, and trans people. There is brutality against people that look like me, right? And so she's bombarded by this. All Two-Spirit, queer, and trans parents are bombarded by that reality. And so, of course, it's going to translate into fear, So I do remember those conversations, and I remember that I could see that. So I would have compassion for my parents. And at the same time, I would be like, but you don't get it. Like, all I need is you. I just need your acceptance, your approval, your support, your love. I don't need, I know you're afraid of those things, but this is enough. And so, like, I just remember it being difficult, and I will share it here because I think this is important to share, and I'll provide a trigger warning for folks, because I do want to talk about suicide. When I was, was it 14? I believe it was 14. Like, I was getting bullied at school. I was being made to kneel down in church and pray against gay people. I would literally, like, pass out at church. And now I realize, looking back, what the fuck that was about. And then I would go home and I would hear my parents in their bedroom. It's like my family has always known that I'm queer, but I would hear these conversations like, oh, she better not be, because, right? So I was just getting messages everywhere that, like, I shouldn't exist, right? And that the way I existed or wanted to or needed to was not okay. So it was definitely a dark, heavy time, figuring out if I even wanted to live, because I knew this is who I was. So if that's not okay, like, is my life even worth living? Right. So that was the conversations that I would have in my head. And I had a plan. I literally had a plan. I knew what I was going to do. But part of what stopped me too was thinking like, this is going to forever destroy my parents, because I knew they loved me. But it was also like, you know what? I think at some point I figured out, but I exist, right? Like, I exist. So there's a reason why. There's a reason why I exist. I didn't choose this. Nobody made me this way. This is how I exist. And one of the choices I made, one, was to live. And two was because I had already decided that I was going to live. And I'm so grateful to myself every day for living. I decided that I also wasn't going to hurt other people as I moved forward. So I didn't, and I know everyone has their other processes, so this isn't to bring shame on other people's experiences, but I didn't want to marry someone because we prefer heterosexual people in this world and then hurt them, because I knew that it would eventually come up. I knew eventually I would need to be my real self. I decided that at 14. I knew all of these things were things that I couldn't, I didn't want to do. I wasn't that person. I didn't want to hurt myself. I didn't want to hurt other people. So some of it was really heavy, a lot of patience, just giving myself space and time to allow for people like my parents to eventually get on board, to eventually understand, and to just see. Some of it I just had to live my life for them to see. And that's literally what happened, Kira. Like, it literally, my parents were not going to attend my wedding. I literally spoke to them and said, when I found the love of my life, I knew it was her. I knew we were going to get married. And I said to my parents, listen, it's really important to me that you're there, but you're telling me you don't want to be there because you believe marriage is between a man and a woman. And I'm going to let you know right now that if you don't come, I want you to know it's not because I didn't want you there. And it's not because I didn't invite you. It's because you chose not to be there. And they had to sit with that. And my parents showed up.
Wow.
And Kira, them being there, see, we had a very small ceremony. It was like max 28 people.
Right. Them
being there, and we integrated them, right? I still had them walk me down, right, to the ceremony. But my parents were my mom was recording us the whole time. And when my parents were about to leave, my mom said to me, she's like, I got to sit around people that fully love you for who you are. And she was like she was just reflecting all these things back to me, and she needed to see that other people could do it. So she could. So she knew I was safe. She knew that I was loved the way she feared I couldn't be. But now it was like there was no denying it, right?
Yeah.
We were at this beautiful ceremony, this beautiful union between two people, and every single person in the space supported and loved us and had nothing but love to share, right? And that for my parents was a pivotal moment for them to breathe, for them to let their guard down, for them to realize, oh wow, she really is okay.
Yeah.
And she's more than okay. She's thriving and she's in love and she has an amazing partner. And it took it's all the way until our wedding. It took that long, right?
Yeah.
And for some people, it can be all their lives, unfortunately, right? So when I get to work with folks now, right, I want them to have that. I want them to experience that magic for themselves, right? So I don't want folks to, oh gosh, Kira, I know so many people that are in their 50s, in their 60s, who know that they're queer and they're not living. You don't just have to die by suicide to not be alive. That's something that I commonly say in my work. You could not be living by not living your true life, right? And I get that comes from real attacks, right? We have over 500 legislative bills that are proposing to attack the rights of two-spirit, queer, and trans people. It's real.
Mm-hmm.
But so are you. So is your reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is your day-to-day life. Don't give those people the power to strip you of the life that you deserve to live, of the love that you deserve in your life. We give the system the power by doing that.
And it's interesting. 3 things came up for me as you were talking, technically 4, because 1, we had chatted years ago and I knew a little bit of the depth of your pain when you were younger. I remember you telling me about kids that would throw sand in your hair and the things that they would say. And so I knew it was something you experienced, but there's something about sitting with somebody and holding that again that I just felt for you again at 14. And that's something I'm sure you've done a lot in your own healing journey and your quest to sort of become the best professional you can be. So you have to turn back to that 14-year-old and give them the love that they needed. And the 3 things that came up as you were talking. So 1, this interaction with your parents. One of the most important things about shame resilience is the ability to only take responsibility for what's yours. And what wasn't yours was your parents' own bias. That wasn't yours to take on. That wasn't your responsibility. That wasn't about you. And what you did in that interaction was the epitome of shame resilience, of saying, I want you there. And I'm going to be grieving and feel really sad at the loss of not having you there if you can't come. But you are making this choice. I've been standing here waiting for you. And when they came, I literally wrote down, before you even said the system part, I wrote down, they chose you over the system. And that was what you were waiting for, was the moment for them, because it was the fear of the system. It was the fear of the what if. It was your mom and your dad not living, not engaging in a life with you because of the fear of what could happen, and not allowing themselves to question it, or to allow the possibility that there could be a both and within that. The 2 questions I think I have for you. So 1, I thought about the you, not just at 14, but before that. And I made some assumptions, so tell me if I'm wrong here. It sounded like you didn't really have anybody to sort this stuff through with. There was a lot of this was an internal processing. It sounded like a lot of these conversations, the choosing to live, the choosing to not hurt people, that this was an internal piece. And so there's a loneliness in that also can get comfortable over time. And so kind of wondering, 1, how hard was it for you to then let somebody into that space? And then 2, how did you either not get or get past the anger and the pain towards your parents for not being able to choose you over the system until that time?
Okay, let me answer the first question, and then I might have to have you
repeat the second one. I'm ready for it. I'm ready.
Yeah. So the first one, yes, it was mostly myself. There was a time where I did fall in love in high school, my first love, and I had dated before that, and I think even that in itself helped. So just knowing like this shit is real and it feels really good. And it's a real, like, genuine connection. How can anyone like see anything wrong in that?
Yeah.
So I think like getting that was helpful. But then I did have one best friend. She's very sarcastic to this day, very funny. And she would just be really sarcastic about the whole thing. Like, oh God, Laura, like, we all know you're gay. Like, why are you holding back? We know you're making out with your girlfriend in the alleyway. Why are you hiding that? You know? So I did have one friend that was like,
I see you.
She would be like, I see you. And without necessarily saying it, right? But she was saying it, and I accept you. And that was, I do think that was important. And it was that it did help. It did help for sure.
Yeah.
But nobody knew, I think, until recent years. I didn't really talk about, having struggled with suicidal ideation, all of those internal thoughts I had to figure out. But once I became open, like at least at school, that's where I saw a shift. I realized that once I accepted myself, then it wasn't a facade to people, and somehow people accepted me more.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. So it's again, the shame that I had internalized from all of these external systems became the thing that was then holding me back. Because then when I owned, yes, I have a girlfriend and I'm queer and this and that, right? That's when I feel like I started to build genuine connections with people, and people wanted to get to know me and to support me and love on me. And so that was, and what the shame was holding me back, because I wasn't building those connections, because I was over here like, people aren't going to like me. People aren't going to like me if I tell them this. Right. But in many instances, it was the thing that, like, once I accepted that and owned that fully for myself, it was fine. It wasn't a big deal.
Well, and it was the sort of tension point between, I call it personality disintegration. And so the idea of like how I'm being told I have to show up in the world isn't in alignment with myself. And so if I show up that way, and that's, I think, what you're describing for so many people that you work with and the people that you are trying to not be a voice for, but to give a voice to, or to give space so they can use their voice more effectively, to be themselves, to be a part of the conversation, and then to shift that narrative. And so there's this idea of, I can't be me if I'm performing, but you also made the commitment that you weren't going to perform. And there are many ways that I think that was a lonelier, more painful choice, because the performance at least works temporarily. And so you had this kind of, I can't step into the world, but I won't perform either. So you really were detached from any sense of either false fitting in and belonging and true fitting in and belonging until you made that choice to move forward. I know I'm super mindful of our time because I know that you have a client coming up in a few minutes. And so I'll return to my one question and then maybe loop it in with our wrap-up question. So my wonder for you, and I really think this is going to be something for a lot of people listening to this, because again, regardless of someone's identity, what we're describing is somebody who exists with the belief that who they are isn't going to be accepted, is not allowed, isn't wanted in the world. And for many people, that story is going to be perpetuated by the people that we're told are supposed to love us, unintentionally, intentionally, whatever that might be, different circumstances. So coming back to my first point of, were you angry at your parents? If so, how did you get past that to show them love and forgiveness? And then maybe my wrap-up question, and if you're like, oh my gosh, this is way too much to cover in 5 minutes, then you maybe give me the boilerplate. We can always expand later. But how do you give maybe the person listening to this, what's the next thing that they could try? What is something internally? What is the one step to take, not to fix this, heal this, because this isn't a one and done, but what's that one step forward that we could invite them to take, that we're there for, and you are wanting to be a part of for them, and will willingly show up and be a part of for them, so they don't have to feel that loneliness that you did?
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. So big questions. Like you said, we might need to have a part 2 or a whole other episode, which I would love. But the first part is, of course, I was very angry and hurt. There was a lot of grief. There was always love, and love can exist with anger, right? There was always love. So I always did know that my parents were good people, even if they didn't always behave in loving ways. And that, I think, helped me with some of that anger. And it's funny how you were like, oh, I remember you in classrooms, and you're definitely someone who like doesn't hold back and shout back. Like it was, I was that person who my mom and I would get in very like bad arguments because I couldn't like take it in. But then later it would still be here, right? So that definitely was present. And I think, like you said, what can you do? What's like one step you could do? It's related to this. It's allowing yourself to feel, allow yourself to have all the emotions exist and give yourself space to understand them, and don't force yourself to try to do it all at once. I like that you said, obviously this could be a lifelong journey, because even me talking now, like I did something last year that was huge with my mom. So that's what I meant with like peeling the layers. We didn't get there overnight.
Right.
And it shouldn't be that way. I know that, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't, but it is a process when that hasn't been folks' realities, right? So what I had to accept is just like it was a process for me. I had to understand and accept. And I think that helped with the anger. Wow. I mean, I hated myself. I didn't want to be alive because this is what I internalized. They internalized a lot too.
Yeah.
And they're having their own process. So I think one of the biggest things is recognizing that it's not personal, but it totally feels like it. So I'm not going to undermine that. But it's the reminder that remind yourself that there's nothing wrong with you, even if people don't quite understand that and haven't had their process or their healing journey to see that. And the more that you remind yourself that every day, you'll start to peel layers. Because like I said, literally last year, I had to sit my mom down and tell her to not make comments about my appearance. And my parents attended my wedding 5 years ago. So I had to sit down and say, I love you, Mom, so that we have a good relationship. Just don't make comments about my gender expression to me. You can talk about me to whoever else. I don't need to hear it.
Yeah.
And that was hard for her. And she cried and she grieved and she had to sit with that. So like, it's iterative. It's an iterative process how we then begin to show up for ourselves in ways that seem so scary to do, impossible to do maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? So also give yourself that grace as you have your process.
I love it. And I think the thing that you're basically giving people is the gift to hold the both and your emotions, your experience, your story is valid. And it's the not feeling those feelings that leads to that I shouldn't be here. I can't exist. Like you said, there's a lot of ways. It's not just suicide that connects to us not living. And so really giving yourself the space and grace and permission to feel what you're feeling and to own that and to validate that, or to seek out supports like you, like me, like other people in the world that want to validate that story. And to recognize that the story that someone else is living in, you're not the primary character. They aren't doing this with the intention to hurt you, to harm you. Again, come back to validating. It is hurtful and harmful. And if you can detach from that, let that be their story, set the boundaries that you need to recognize that that's how they're showing up. That's where the process can be, where you can move forward. And you've had these beautiful process where the onions are leading you together and closer, and not everyone will have that. Sometimes it will be more distance and there will be different types of grief, but that process is an inevitable process to happen to allow you to continue to come to yourself, like you said, to locate yourself, to come into that space. Oh my gosh, this is beautiful. You need to go be with the clients. You can spread this magic with somebody else. So I just really quickly, before we hang up, where can people find you? Because they're going to be having that same Pop Rocks feeling in their brain right now. And they're like, I need more of her. I need more of this person. So where do they go to find you, to connect with you, to show you love?
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. And please do connect with me. I love connecting with folks. Folks DM me all the time on social media. So you can literally Instagram me, follow me at DR for Dr. period Laura, Laura Minero, Minero. Also my website, lauraminerophd.com or yolotlibre.com. And you can always email me and I'll share that with Kira. So hopefully it'll be available
Perfect.
somewhere, but same DRL at gmail.com.
I love it. I'll have all of this in the show notes for people, all sorts of places. I'll put a link to the documentary too. So you can just, again, connect with Lauda in such a beautiful way that just, it's a centering of yourself in somebody else, just in doing that same process and that same work. And so thank you so much for this. This has been truly a gift. I can't wait for you to come back to see where we go next in another episode. Okay. So much love.
Thank you, Kara.
Take it with your client. I love you too.
I would need to remind myself that every time I meet with you,
we need
I need to bring more time, but also Kleenex boxes every time.
I love it. That's what we're going to do next time. I was crying too. So I'm with you in that. I'm like, oh my gosh, you do this to me always. I love it. So, okay. Right. We will talk soon. Much love. Bye. Bye.